Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about something that's a little bit mind-bending. And to put it in simple terms, it's that we live right now in 2024 in conditions that are worse than the novel 1984. Certainly as concerns information. Or I should put it another way, as concerns the truth of information. And that we've gotten to this point because of an abandonment of beauty within our entertainment. But before we get there, I just want to let everyone know there are two links in the description and the pinned comment for my 3 graphic novels. There are 2 superhero graphic novels, 1 low fantasy graphic novel, Crom the Destroyer, and I will be playing the trailer for Crom the Destroyer at the end of this video in case people want to see a little bit more about the story for one of my graphic novels. You're looking at some of the beautiful art from those graphic novels in the background, and I focus on, as my channel here, the traditional idea of a hero, a paragon of virtue, and the meritorious way of constructing a good story and a good graphic novel. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and see if one of my graphic novels is for you. But back to my topic. As I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about entertainment and how this whole thing came in through entertainment, but it does have to do a lot with the political. Why? Because, well, we're talking about truth and the dissemination of truth or non-truth within our society right now. And if you're listening to this in the far-flung future, what is the situation right now that prompted me to think about this and to talk about this? Well, it's late July 2024. Joe Biden has abandoned his run for president, and they have set up Kamala Harris as the person who is going to be taking his place, and they are, in many people's estimation, memory holing many of the things that she's done in the past, saying, no, those are completely false, even though we have said they were true in the past. No, now they're completely false. And a lot of people, especially conservative-minded people and pundits, are all saying, well, this is gaslighting. This is 1984. And I'm here to tell those people, no, you got it wrong. It's not gaslighting. And it's actually worse than 1984. And I don't know how far out, how much of a reach this video is going to have, but if you have a conservative-minded person who gives you information, who does videos on YouTube, Twitter, whatever, I would ask that you tag them or forward them this video, because pretty much no one understands what I'm about to say, not in the conservative circles. They're all coming up with this idea, again, that it's gaslighting, that we're in 1984, when, again, that's not the case. That would be a preferable case to what we have right now. They simply don't understand what's going on. So, tag Carl over at Lotus Eaters, Tim Pool, Black Conservative Perspective, Liberal Hive Mind, Matt Walsh, anybody, because none of them really understand what's going on. And none of them understand what's going on because what they're doing is they're trying to understand the situation according to a conservative mindset, but then they're making the mistake of imposing that conservative mindset onto the opposite side to understand how those people on the other side think and what they are doing, when you can't do that because the people on the other side do not think in a conservative way. And when I talk about conservative way, I mean the basic principles of whether or not something is objectively true or not. Because you got to remember, these people on the other side, these quote-unquote progressive people, have no concept of objective truth. Now, I'm going to come back to that point, but let's start with the very small. Let's start with entertainment and see where this mindset has entered into and become pervasive within our society. Because really, that's the key. Pervasive in our society. Now, I'm going to reference some of the key factors which I've gone over previously on this channel according to the entertainment systems that we use, or at the very least that we used to use, in order to enjoy storytelling. So let's start off with Marvel Comics. Now, Marvel Comics built its entire empire upon the idea of continuity. When it was the new kid on the block, it was fighting against DC Comics, and that's what the distinguishing mark of Marvel was in order for it to become the top comic seller and sell out the old system of DC Comics. You can go back to Jim Shooter, the great editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics from the 1980s. He tells this story over and over again. He used to write for DC Comics. He started to write Superman comics back when he was about 14 years old. And the thing was that at the point where Marvel started kicking the butt of DC Comics, he realized that it was because Marvel Comics had continuity. DC Comics did not. You could pick up any DC comic of any line, let's say Superman, and read them in any order. It did not matter. But Marvel was different. Its stories came one after another after another. It was not, well, in Aristotelian terms, it was not episodic. It had the proportionality of a story that follows along a central line of storytelling, which again is to say it had continuity. And he even argued with the editors at DC to try and bring in continuity. They said no. And again, Marvel Comics just kicked the butt of DC Comics. Now, why am I saying all this? Because within the last 10, 15 years, I guess since around 2009, but I would say slightly earlier than that, we had Marvel Comics go completely off the rails with the idea of continuity, even though it was the thing that built the entire system of Marvel Comics. And if you picked up a Marvel comic, well, I suppose now, but I don't read very much of them now, but certainly within the last 5 years, and started to read it, you would shake your head because of the lack of continuity. And not just the lack of continuity within the story as compared with other Marvel stories, but the lack of continuity within the story itself. You had storytellers telling stories that would contradict their own story from a couple of pages ago. And as I usually talk about it in the terms of, you had a universe that would warp and twist and bend around the central character, which, by the way, was a representation of progressive ideology, but warp and twist around that representation of progressive ideology in order to affirm it. And that just shot any continuity whatsoever. Now, this is not something that is exclusive to Marvel Comics over the last 10 to 15 years, certainly not. Many people who watch, let's say, Star Wars or Star Trek, or I'm sure any other science fiction and fantasy property would have the same complaint. It's that this thing, this story that people love, has continuity because it has events in the past that they should be referencing and reverencing to the extent that they need to understand that it happened, and the current storytellers can't just ignore the entire history of that story that they're writing in order to, let's say, shove in one of their plot points that confirms progressivism. It just should not work that way. All right, now let's jump forward to a Zoom call from the Writers Guild of America that I covered. Now, this was a major Zoom call, again, from the Writers Guild of America. It had people who were comic book writers and showrunners for comic book stories that were going to be translated to the big screen and to the small screen. So you had a plethora of different people on the Zoom call. And again, I covered this on my channel. I do believe the original title for the YouTube video that they put up was Queering Legacy Characters, or How to Queer Legacy Character. And what did they talk about? Well, they talked about how you take a character, let's say, I think they discussed taking Moose from Archie Comics. How do you take that character that has a backstory of, 60 years plus, maybe even 80 years, and suddenly turn them into one of the alphabet community? And the answer was as follows. In their minds, the minds of these quote-unquote heavy progressive people that were talking and that run these industries and that create these stories, according to them, there is still continuity as long as there is emotional continuity. That means that no, it doesn't matter if you violate the events, the objective events that happened within the history of this character, as long as it has emotional continuity, then that's the only continuity that matters. Now, what do they mean? They mean that it has to be a natural flow, kind of like a river flows. It bends and twists and turns and ends up in an entirely different location than where it began. So as long as that river flowing of emotion is actually continuous, then you can indeed take the character, any character, and turn them and queer them, as they talk about. Again, that's the entire subject matter of this Zoom call, which, by the way, is still up on YouTube. But again, what they talked about as continuity would be nothing at all like the continuity that you and I or older fans would understand. Continuity, according to older fans, and really I would say according to not just conservative minded people, but people who understand what a good story is, they would understand continuity as there are certain past events that you have set up. Those are now objective events that occurred within the character's past, and you have to work around those events in order to have continuity within your story, within what is presently being created. But no, these people would say, no, it doesn't matter. None of those objective events matter. Why? Because objectivity in the minds of these quote unquote progressive people makes zero impact. All that matters is the subjective truth. All that matters is the subjectivity of their feelings and how they continuously flow in a direction. And therefore, as long as you can show that continuous flow of emotion in the direction of turning a character into a queer character, even if they've not been that way for 80 years, even if we've seen their thought bubbles for 50, 60 years and we understand they're not, it doesn't matter. You can do that as long as there's emotional continuity. And this is what these storytellers have been doing for 10 to 15 years minimum. They've been taking the subjective and replacing the objective with the subjective. Because within the mind of these quote unquote progressive people, there is no such thing as objective. There's only subjective. And again, this is the point that conservative people are not understanding. This is the point where they make their mistake. They believe, and I believe, and I'm sure many of you out there believe as well, there's such a thing as objective reality. There is objective truth and there is subjective truth. The fact that I like ice cream is a subjective truth. The fact that the three laws of logic exist, well, those are objective truth. Because a thing is what it is. A thing cannot be itself and its opposite in the same place at the same time. Those are objective things. But within the mind of these quote unquote progressive people, there is no such thing as objective truth. Therefore, to even hint at such a thing existing in trying to understand what they're doing makes no sense. And before I move on with that, I just want to add this part. The reason why we understand these things like lack of continuity as making bad art is because, as conservative-minded people, we understand what beauty is. If you go back to the pinnacles of logic through our society, people like Aristotle and Aquinas, they understand and delve deeply into the artistic, into storytelling, these kinds of things which are expressions of the human spirit, and they talk about it in a logical way according to what? According to what I'm always referencing, which is the true, the good, and the beautiful. And if we go back to, let's say, Aquinas' definition of what beauty is, it's very simply three terms. The three characteristics of beauty is integrity, proportionality, and clarity. Now, you'll see as I talk more and more about this, why and how those three principles of beauty are violated over and over again by these quote-unquote progressive artists. But first of all, I want to concentrate on the one that actually ties in with what I've been talking about over the last few minutes. I've been talking about continuity. Well, continuity should be a part of all three, but most notably a part of proportionality. That is to say, not only does it have the correct proportions, but those proportions are in a ordered fashion wherein one necessarily comes before another and one necessarily comes after another. This is also, again, part of clarity and certainly part of integrity. And this would be, again, the basis of statements from Aristotle, like the fact that episodic stories are the worst kind of stories. Why does he say that? Why? Because it doesn't have proportionality, which is to say that you can have in an episodic story event A, B, and C, and you can jumble them around any way you want. It doesn't matter. C can come before A and B can come before C and A. It doesn't matter. That's a episodic story. He says, no, a good story, a story according to beauty, is one that must follow A, B, C. That's the only way it can have integrity, proportionality, and clarity. And that makes, at the very least, a better story. I would say a story to begin with. So with these people who are violating continuity in order to push their political agenda into the story and have the story warp and bend around the representation of their ideology, which is a character within their story to promote their story, it's not a story at all. It's a panegyric. It's propaganda in order to sell you the idea that this representation of their ideology is good and therefore their ideology is good. They can violate ideas of continuity all over the place, and that's what they do in order to do so. But again, that violates the basic tenets of what beauty is. And why am I talking about beauty in this way? Because, of course, according to these logical thinkers who understand what beauty is and analyze artistic expression according to logical means, they also understand, again, as I said, the true, the good, and the beautiful. And those three things and their interconnectedness, which is to say, the truth is also beautiful and good. The good is also beautiful and true. All of these three are interconnected. And if you chip away at beauty in something, then you're also chipping away at the truth. And that is what these people are doing by introducing elements within their storytelling which, let's say, contradict continuity. Not only are they creating a bad story, but they're also chipping away at the underlying understanding that there is such thing as objective truth. Now, let's dive headfirst into the way a quote-unquote progressive person actually thinks. For a person who does not recognize objective truth in any way, for a person who says there's only subjective truth, your truth or my truth, it doesn't matter. There is no such thing as the truth, according to these people. In such a mindset, how do you understand the world and how do you understand the presentation of information? Well, we have to look at this on a spectrum. And the spectrum is that at the very individual basis, there's only individual truth. Your truth, my truth, it doesn't matter. It's just subjective to every individual. Now that's key and important, and I'll get back to that, but just keep that in mind as we move forward. But on a larger scale, a scale of, let's say, a society, you can't have every individual actually pursuing their own independent subjective truth. So what is the truth for a society? Again, remembering always that there's no such thing as objective truth. Well, the truth for a society that a society actually recognizes would, in the middle part of the spectrum, be the democratic idea, so-called, that a thing is true because the majority of people believe that it's true. But if you go to the other end of the spectrum of the individual, well, the other end of the spectrum is the fact that there is somebody in political control of your society. Because, again, these people, these quote-unquote progressive people who derive their ideas from a socialist mentality, to them, since there is no objective truth, the only thing that establishes anything that even remotely appears like truth is a power structure. And the person or persons who set up this power structure are the persons in control of the society. They are the persons in control of the political. Don't believe me? Well, look at something just simply that's all around us today, which is the current idea of environmentalism. That idea is the fact that political parties can affect the environment and how it works, the environment, by the way, of the entire planet, and how it works, simply by instituting laws. Why and how do they think that is even remotely possible? Well, it harkens back to the idea that everything, including all of reality around you, is a social construct. And therefore, the people in control of the social, which is the political party in control of the social, and by the way, that's only the left-leaning parties. The right-wing parties that believe in objective truth are just deluded beyond compare and are irrelevant to the entire conversation. But yes, the political parties, the left-wing political parties in control, can affect reality itself, and certainly part of that reality being the ecological system of the planet, by instituting laws. And by the way, this is not a new idea, just like the fact that politically correct language is not a new idea. That is an idea that is bare minimum 60 years old, created by the USSR. The idea of politically correct language is the idea that your language, or politically correct anything, not just language, but we'll talk about it in terms of language, but the politically correct is that which is in accord with the policies of the party, which at that time, of course, was the sole party of the Communist Party that controlled the USSR. And I'll give you one historical example of this to tie together a lot of the things that I've been talking about. Within the USSR, I think it was in the 1960s, they started experimentations, which they then put into practice within their farming systems, and the entire basis of the experimentation and the new farming science was the politically correct science of the party, which is to say, they would take, for example, the planting of crops and do it in a way which is in accord with the ideology of the party. Because in their minds, those plants would grow better because everything must follow the ideology of the party because the party's in control. And therefore, they would make a farming system which was much more efficient. Now, this farming system, of course, completely failed and caused massive amounts of famine. But when that happened, they said, well, it's not because we followed the ideology in the system of planting of these crops. No, it was because the people who planted the crops didn't plant them politically correctly according to the ideas of the party, and therefore punish them. They're the ones at fault. But again, can you just imagine the mind-bending absurdity of saying we need to plant crops in accord with socialist ideology? Because again, science is not an objective thing. It follows the subjective rules of political correctness. But this is the state that we're at right now. And this is where we get into the notion that I talked about at the first, that the story elements of the novel 1984 are actually much more conservative and much more understandable than what we actually have today as a system of information gathering and dissemination. Why? Because within the novel 1984, the main character had a job wherein he would rewrite all of history according to what was the political statement of the day from the party that was in control. And, oh yes, I should mention here, of course, the party in control in 1984 is a fascist party, but unlike these people on the left who don't understand, who think that fascism and communism are two ends of a spectrum, no, I'm sorry, they're very close cousins, right there, right next to each other on the left-hand side of the spectrum. But again, the point is that his job was to rewrite all of history because the idea was that the party needed to control not just the present and the future, but they needed to control the past as well, because people, if they knew that what the party was saying currently was not true, then would look at the past and know that it wasn't true and therefore rebel against the party. But that is actually a conservative way of looking at the entire thing. That enters into the minds of the people that you're describing a objective norm. And that objective norm is that the past is something that exists, that it has continuity, that it is objectively there. And again, you got to remember that that is completely gone. You can't actually accept that if you are one of these quote-unquote heavy progressives. Now, what do I mean by this? Can I give an example of what is going on right now? Well, sure, I can give a couple of examples, and I will do so. Let's say in the year 2020, someone appointed as having authority over health situations told you that putting something on your face would not help you whatsoever in contracting a certain illness. And that was absolutely true. Then, several weeks later, that exact same person said, no, you actually have to put these things on your faces in order to ensure that you're not going to either contract or disseminate this certain virus. And then later, let's say 2 to 4 years later, that same person comes back out and says, well, no, I never said that. That was never true. It was never true that wearing these things on your face was actually going to prevent anything. Now, a lot of people, like me on the conservative side, would say, this person was obviously lying. We have recordings of this person saying the exact opposite of what he had declared first to be true, and then to be false, and then to be true. Can these people on the other side not understand that they're being completely lied to? Do they not understand that they're being gaslit? Do they not understand this is 1984 and these people are trying to rewrite history? No, they do not understand. Why? Because in thinking that, you are applying an objective standard to the entire situation. The objective standard is that something exists objectively. And in the progressive mind, nothing exists objectively. So, within their minds, how would they interpret this situation? Well, let's take our basic premise of situation in time A, B, and C. In time A, the authorities declared it to be false. In time B, the authorities declared it to be true. In time C, the authorities declared it to be false once again. But they will never admit, even to this day, that they either told a lie or that they were mistaken. How does that work? Well, that works because if you have a mindset that truth is completely subjective, it's on the spectrum of the individual on one hand to the societal control mechanism on the other, which is the party in control of the entire society, then you have to understand that you can be overridden in your personal subjective feelings by the party declaring it to be in a certain way. Because when the party declares it at point A to be false, it is not just false within that moment, it is not just false within the future, it is false within that moment, within the future, and within the past. And at point B, when they declare it to be true, it is true in the past, in the future, and in the present. And at point C, when they once again declare it to be false, it is false within the past, the present, and the future. It doesn't matter if you can pull up even recordings of these people saying the exact opposite of what they're saying right now, because within the mind of a progressive, since the people in control of the society can declare what the truth is, and they can, then what they declare to be true is not just true right at this moment, it's true for all time. And it does not matter if they contradict themselves the next day and say the opposite is true for all time. In that moment, it is true for all time. That's all they care about. The other example would be what's going on right now. They're trying to clean up Kamala Harris's record in order to present her as a good presidential candidate. And the most egregious of this is to say that she was never border czar, and to even declare such a thing is absurd. Even though many people have, within 24 hours, compiled entire lists of videos having those exact same people state that she was the border czar in the past. How does this work? Is this gaslighting? Is this 1984? Again, no. To their minds, it's not gaslighting. Why is it not gaslighting? Because gaslighting, again, involves some continuity. It involves some idea of objective truth. It is to say, there is a true thing, and I'm trying to convince you of a lie in order for you to either accept the lie or think that you're crazy in accepting the truth. But again, gaslighting takes into account an element of objectivity, and there is no such thing as objectivity in the minds of these people. And so it is within the storyline of 1984. The idea that they had to go back and change all of history and all records in order to ensure that people would still believe this is a conservative-minded idea, which is based upon even just simply a hint of the idea that objectivity exists. They don't need to do that, and that's why we live in a current situation which is even worse than 1984. There is zero reason to go back and erase all of history, to erase all recordings, to erase all text, all pictures, anything that might point to the direction that what they say now, the party in control, that they say right now is contradictory to what they said yesterday or last year. They don't even need to do that. Why? Because all they need to do is instill within the minds of their followers the idea that what we say at any given moment is completely true for all time, and it simply does not matter under those conditions whether they contradict what they said just a minute ago. Because in that moment, it becomes true for all time. And since you're talking to people who have no concept of objective truth, only subjective truth, they will accept that uncritically. Now, a few takeaways from this are, number one, why do they accept it uncritically? Why would you have people that are in such a reality denying state that they would accept it uncritically? Well, it goes back to that idea that I'm talking about, which is to say that this is the declaration by the people in control, the progressive people in control of the society, but that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is there's only individual subjective truth. If these people were to abandon the idea that the party can declare what is true for all time in the moment, they must also abandon the idea that there is nothing but subjective truth for themselves as individuals. And when you enter into their lives, the idea that there is objective truth that they have to navigate around in their actions, they can no longer be completely and utterly selfish. Because that's really what the declaration of there's only subjective truth is for. It is for them to declare that I can do whatever it is I want to do at any moment of any time because I believe it to be true. Which is to say, they are people that are controlled by the complete vice of selfishness. So, in order for them to challenge the idea that the powers that be can declare what is true for all time, they must also accept, in some small way, objective truth and the fact that they, as individuals, can't be completely selfish, and they will never do that. Why? Because they're completely selfish, of course. Secondly, there might be people out there who are dismissing this entire thing, saying such a system of falsehood could never stand any test of time. And I'm here to say, as a student of history, all you got to do is look at history, and you can find examples of this working spectacularly well. The fact that the ancient Egyptians would destroy the historical records, which were written on stone, of their predecessors in order to make themselves look better, worked spectacularly well for, at the very least, hundreds and hundreds of years after those pharaohs were long dead and buried. Sometimes thousands of years. We just have to look at the fact of what Henry VIII did about 500 years ago within England. He literally had government operatives go around destroying any kind of literature or monuments that would show that the time of the past, which was the medieval period, was anything but dirty, disgusting, and full of death. And we have believed that lie up until this present day. Most historians believed that lie up until about the last 25 years. Trust me, I was there when the changeover happened within the historical mindset, studying history. And most people today still think about the medieval period as that dirty, disgusting, death-ridden place. Why? Because the world is controlled by English-speaking societies, and within English-speaking society, it was understood through the actions of Henry VIII that the Middle Ages was nothing more than the Monty Python sketch of Bring Out Your Dead. So don't get too comfortable thinking this entire thing is absurd and the truth will out, because yes, the truth will out, but it might be after hundreds or thousands of years. And thirdly, what is the importance of me having to go over this entire thing? Doesn't it seem like splitting hairs? Doesn't it seem like a moot point? Let's just deal with it as we see fit, as people who understand that there is objective truth. Well, the key point in covering this entire thing is that you need to understand, first and foremost, that this is how the minds of these people work. And as such, they wish to impose this entire mindset on all of society. Indeed, the only way that this actually continues as a system is if they can impose this entire thing upon all of society. Now, have they gotten to the point where they can run roughshod over everyone and impose it upon all of society? Well, they've been trying. There are still people out there, like yourself, like myself, who don't follow this kind of thinking, who still believe in objective truth, but we are seen as cranks. We are seen as conspiracy theorists. We are seen as people who simply don't understand the so-called complexity of the situation. But again, right now, they have control over the systems of disseminating information. And that's all they need. As long as they have a majority control over either the populace and or the systems that disseminate information, then they impose this entire mindset on you. And by the way, this is a mindset of insanity. And this is the mindset of insanity that they want you to live under, a mindset of insanity where not even your thoughts can be your own. This is a relativistic mindset, and what we live under right now is known as the tyranny of relativity, because everything is relative to the statements of the people in control at the present time, even the past. They get to declare what is quote unquote true, and it is true for all time in that moment. And the reason why I started with entertainment, the reason why I talked about the true, the good, the beautiful, is because, as I said at the beginning of this video, the mechanism whereby they brought this entire mindset to be imposed upon our society, a mindset which is far worse than the mindset of even 1984, was first and foremost through entertainment. This tyranny of relativism was sold to us, packaged and sold through entertainment. And not just any entertainment, but entertainment that devalues and contradicts the idea of beauty. And I'll sum the entire thing up by making a statement to anybody who maybe in the far future might be listening to this video. Beware of the society that abandons beauty. Why? Because abandoning beauty is the first step in abandoning truth. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there are 2 links in the description for my 3 graphic novels. One, Return to Form for low fantasy, sword and sorcery graphic novel, the trailer for which I will be playing in just a second, and 2 superhero graphic novels, stories that base themselves and explore the idea of a true, traditional paragon of virtue, which is a hero. So if that sounds or looks appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and order yourself a copy of one of my graphic novels today. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.
An age ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled, our heart has returned, and the world